right, what an honor to have two of the top coaches in college hockey today and all time, all on one interview here. Both Cornell and North Dakota having just incredible seasons this year, and unfortunately they were cut short by this coronavirus, but very, very honored to have both of you on, Coach Barry, Coach Schafer. Appreciate it very much so.
No problem, Topher. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Topher. It's great to be here.
All right, cool. Let's dive right into it. And one of the things that I love to do, typically when I would go down to Florida when we had our college coaching convention, I would try to seek out a coach that won at some level during the year and just ask them why. What was it about this specific team that allowed you guys to win a championship and be so successful? So Coach Barry, maybe I'll start with you first. Is there something in particular, maybe one or two things about this group that you guys had this year that really made it so special?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think there's a couple of things. I think, I alluded to you a little bit before we talked here. Us not making the national tournament a couple of years in a row. And, we have a junior class this year that experienced that over their first 2 years here. And that's something that normally we make that tournament and have a chance to win. And they didn't get to experience that. And they were pretty influential players on our team skill-wise. And I think it was pretty neat. They talked together, guys like Jordan Kawaguchi and Colin Adams and Grant Mishmash, Matt Kirstead. They talked together about, hey, we got to be better and we got to make an impact. We got to take the reins as upperclassmen here. So those guys took a step, and then we brought in some pretty good freshmen here with a kid named Shane Pinto from Long Island, New York. That, you never know how it goes for freshmen, but he had a pretty good freshman year here. And then us coaches, we knew we had to get better in some of the details and different things that we had to do to keep moving here. And so I think collectively as a group, it was a challenge to all of us to try to get better.
That's great. Shafe, how about you?
Yeah, Brad, stay out of Long Island, man. All right, stay out of Long Island. You stay outside of out past Michigan, Lake Michigan.
Okay, if you stay out of BC, we'll stay out of Long
Island. All right, all bets are off. I think that Brad talks about right away is players. I mean, the kind of the players' attitudes, and we can say all we want as a coaching staff about where we want to get to and how we want to get there. But I think it really comes down to the character of the players and their drive of wanting to succeed. And for us, that's been an ongoing process. And to have the kind of year we had, I think that stems from, that culture that exists within our program. That has to do a lot with what, recruiting and bringing the right kind of kid that's going to play in our program and want to play selfless. And I think the second part is that facing that adversity from previous years, like what Brad talked about, is that I think, in all different programs, we face that adversity in different ways. And for us, I think the guys knew how tenuous the previous season was, where we had a lot of injuries, but we never really accomplished the goals that we wanted to accomplish, even though we got in the NCAA tournament and we got to a game within the Frozen Four. We didn't really finish it. And that kind of was our model for this year, was to finish things. And unfortunately, things get swept away. But, losing in the championship game against Clarkson, losing two of our better players in that game, and Jeff Malott and Matt Galida. Then the following weekend, playing against Northeastern, but not getting past it. So I think those are the keys for us, is that, our season was really driven by our players and their want to be more consistent.
That's great. And you guys both mentioned adversity as a huge piece of getting over that hump this year. And Shafe, I was around, we had a couple tough years together, and we really sat down as a staff and really kind of charted the way forward in terms of who we wanted to be as a team, culture-wise, recruiting philosophies, and just kind of put everything out on the table. And it sounds, Coach Barry, like you guys had a similar type of experience at North Dakota, not making the tournament for 2 years. So when you guys go back and you look at that time when you reevaluated the program and needed to change some things, Shafe, I'll start with you first. What was that experience like, and how much do you think just kind of taking a step back and reevaluating led to the success that you guys are having today?
Yeah, I think that 4 or 5 years ago, there was a lot of transition, how the game was being played. I think recruiting is in a transitional period about, grabbing kids when they were young. It was a very, very transitional time. And so going out and finding kids was transitional. How the game, I think, was being played at the college level was changing. And, we decided we had to change. And for us in recruiting, I'll go back on the recruiting aspect, we changed by, going back and starting to take late bloomers, guys that had a chip on their shoulder, guys that were passed over maybe in their different areas, but also going back into the areas that and not committing to kids until we actually saw it with our eyes and stopped going with potential and started to see them as players. Yeah, I think that was the first one. And the second one was to just put a little bit more emphasis on and not thinking that we could develop everybody. I think part of our talent, and we thought over the years, was to bring kids in and develop them as hockey players. And then it took a little shot to the ego, is that, we need to kind of really see that for ourselves, not just seeing a bigger kid that we thought we could mold, but rather than making sure that they have the size, speed, skill, hockey sense, and spirit that all kind of, map us as a program. And by making that change and putting more emphasis on the speed, but also changing some of our systems so that we could play faster. That was not a scary time, but it was a time that I had become more uncomfortable as a coach because, we'd had so much success for so long doing it one way. And then we went changed and went back and did something different. And hasn't changed a whole lot, but it definitely has changed.
Yeah. Yeah. How about you, Coach?
Yeah, I think Schafer hit it right on the head there. I think obviously that changing the way you do things constantly to think outside the box a little bit. I think, one thing about college is, especially when, you have your players up to 4 years, sometimes you become stagnant in a lot of the ways you think. And, just because you have a little bit of success, doesn't mean that you have to keep doing the things the same way. I think like everybody else, people embrace change and they like to shake it up a little bit here. And, I go back to, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, we go out to Buffalo, New York for, all those U.S. development camps for young athletes going out there in the summertime. And I can remember when Schafer called me and he called a bunch of head coaches from around the country. And he said, hey, we got some time in between sessions here. Why don't we all get together and brainstorm and really be open and talk about what programs do on and off the ice. And I thought that was very, very impactful. I know it was for me. And I think it's one of those things that as a coach, you have to be open on trying to learn from others. It doesn't matter how much experience you have, but, try to grow as a coach over the years, because I'll tell you what, when you think you know it all, you really don't. And I think players actually love it that, you're human and the fact that you want to get better as well as they do. So I think it's one of those things that, it ever evolves, whether it's coaching or recruiting, that you have to change your ways and adapt to the times.
Yeah, for sure. And what are some things that I know both of you guys are very into that in terms of being lifelong learners and having relationships with people around the business that can make you better. What are some things that you guys do for your own coaching development that maybe some coaches watching here can implement in their own careers? Shafe, we'll start with you.
Well, coaching development, I go back to what Brad said. I mean, is that, for me, going right back and just continuing to learn. And, we were up in Buffalo and had that opportunity to sit down with Norm Bazan and a couple other coaches and just, I think the drills are one thing. I mean, everybody can see drills when you can walk into a rink and see how a team practices. And one of the things that we talked about with Brad and those guys, that thing was, but what are you emphasizing? Like what's the nitty gritty on your, for you to demand, because everybody's got their own mark on their team. And so I think that's one is not just the drills, but, what makes a North Dakota so good? What makes a UMass Lowell so good? And so that's one. I think, it's hard for coaches, but, having connections, Jeff Blashill, and Dave Quinn the last 2 years, I've got an opportunity to go to Detroit and the Rangers and just sit back and watch guys and how they're dealing with professionals, because I think it was big to be able to talk to our players about, what they're doing is the exact same thing that we're doing. They're developing, they're getting better, and the grass isn't greener on the other side, and they're doing the exact same things, but they're doing it a little bit differently. So that's another one. And for me, I think that, sitting down and really just reflecting about, the last major part of the coaching development aspect of it is just relationships and just trying to get better and better and better at dealing with our players and having a deeper relationship with our guys on our team. And, that's, as something over the last 3 years is that I've really tried to accomplish more as a head coach is just delving deeper into what makes kids tick, not just, having surface conversations, having real conversations, and I think that is helped our staff become a better coaching staff and getting to know our players on a deeper level. And so that coaching development, I think those are the three areas for us. I think that we've tried to become a better coaching staff.
Love that. How about you, Coach Barry?
Yeah, exactly. I'll mimic everything that Shape says there. I think one thing that we really try to strive, and I think changed in a lot of different ways over the past few years, is connectivity or the communication side within coaching. It seems like everybody is detailed X's and O's, whether it's, the video pre-scout, everybody knows what everybody else is doing. Everybody, excuse me, everybody has an identity on how they want to play within their system and structure. So, you got to get through that the first, month or two to get everything down, and then everybody pretty much knows it. But I think what has to be growing and building the whole year is your connectivity and communication with players and building relationships, because that's a big deal. And even though Schafer and I, we're getting up there in age a little bit, probably me a little bit more older than anybody, but I think, young people coming in now from all walks of life with different things going on in their lives, you really got to pull the layers back on them and see what makes them tick. And I think at the end of the root of it all is they have to know that you care. And I think, the biggest thing is if a player knows that, you got his back and, he cares, whether it's on ice or off ice, they're going to go through the wall for you. And, that's a big deal. And you have to try to start building that early. And that's one thing I've noticed is, everybody wants to get through the X's and O's and be sharp and detailed. And that's what you want to be. But I think at the end of the day, you have to really dig into the individual side with all the different players. And that's why, like us as coaches, we have to make sure that we delegate and we have opportunities to do that. And one of the things that we do here is, before in the old days, the head coach ran the practices, all the drills, and the assistant coaches push the pucks. And now it has to be delegated where, the head coach, you run 2 or 3 drills, probably the meat of the practice, and the other coaches run the other drills, and you kind of share it. But that gives the head coach an opportunity to kind of go in lines and talk to players and whether it's sharpen their details of on the ice, but also talk to them personally on a one-to-one level of what makes them tick. And I think that's a big deal if you have a leeway to not just run the drills, but kind of see what goes in behind the scenes of a player on and off the ice.
Yeah, Coach, how much do you think that delving into the relationship side of things has helped you to become a better coach, just in terms of knowing your players more?
Well, 2 ways. Like first, the player knows that you care in the first thing, and whether that's on ice or off ice, and that he has the trust within you to come to you. Because I'll tell you one thing, especially when the age disparity gets a little bit higher, and I'm getting older, and the players are getting younger coming in here, that you have to bridge that gap, and you have to know that, hey, this guy, I can trust this guy going to him. If I have a problem, I can go to this guy instead of just holding it in. So building that trust factor. But for me, it's also me trying to get better and being on the same level as them, because one thing that we try never to do is have that line in the sand and say, hey, players, you're on one side of it and coaches, you're on the other. And as soon as you get rid of that line, and again, there has to be some concepts as far as structure and hierarchy as far as leadership, but as far as being in it together, we have a saying here: it's we, us, and our. It's not I, me, or you. It's we, us, and our in everything that we do, and that's a big deal. And I think our players feel that.
That's really cool. And Shafe, how about you? How has that kind of changed in your coaching career, and how much do you feel like getting to know your players has helped you as a coach?
I don't think it's changed a whole lot in my coaching career. I mean, I think that it's been relatively the same. I think that the issues are a little bit more blurred. And again, I think I go back to it. Probably 4 or 5, 6 years ago. I think that just sitting down and saying that relationships. I think that I got tired of hearing as a coach that social media this and the different things that kids were different, and I kind of got tired of it as a coach, a few years ago. And I just was like, I got to go back to doing the things that I've always done. And, relationships have always been the strength, I think, of our program between our players and our coaching staff. And I wasn't as accepting of the social media aspect of it that maybe some other coaches are. And just trying to find out what is preventing, our players from reaching. I think, every person, including myself, you have something that's holding you back, from really kind of reaching your potential. And, and I think that, that those ground root efforts of trying to, grassroots efforts of trying to figure out what makes our kids tick, what's holding them back. When they start to see the things that are holding them back, then they start to really kind of really look at, and they're, as Brad said, they're more open to you. They'll start to look at their own behavior, what they're doing away from the rink, which is, it's just changing. It's evolving what's holding them back over more and more over the last few years. But what's getting them over that is not change. That's a relationship. And I think that I have probably in the last 3-4 years done more talking to players at season-ending interviews about what's holding them back and where they can go forward, rather than X's and O's and what they need to do to get better as a hockey player. Most of that has been spent with what they can start doing mentally to make themselves better. So that's probably the biggest change, and that always comes back to relationships, because they have to be open to talk about it.
Well, that's really interesting that you're talking about that. You get the chance to talk to a lot of different players, and I'm sure there's a lot of different answers to the questions, but as a whole, is there one thing or a couple different things that you feel like are pretty standard in terms of what are holding kids back today from reaching their potential, from your conversations that you've had with your players over the past few years?
Well, for me, I'll go. I mean, I don't think it is one thing. I think that a lot of kids, a lot of these kids are really mature, but immature, and not immature in a bad way. Is that there's a lot of pressure put on these kids, when they're 15, 16, 17, that they're such great players, and in a little different way, they're not allowed to grow up, and they got a lot of pressures from their parents or from, junior teams, advisors, wanting to be in the NHL, to being successful in school. A lot of pressure, to always be at the top of their class as far as academically. So I think it's really different, and every kid is unique. And for some kids, they want to be they're perfectionists, or for some kids, they have defense mechanisms that don't allow them to have a real relationships with other kids. For some kids, they're fear of failure. It varies so much with regards to each kid, and that's the unique thing is to try to find what it is. When you start to peel away the layers of that onion, what is it really that it can really get them to, as said, because have real relationships, because it's our culture is dependent on playing for our teammate. Our culture is dependent on playing for each other, and our university. And to do that, I just think that what holds guys back is so many different areas that you really have to find out what it is. And I tell you what, and once you start going in that direction, that's why I say things haven't changed. And I think they've actually gotten better, because I think kids will actually open up a little bit more than they would 25 years ago. They'll tell you about their problems. They'll tell you about the issues that they have. Not all of them, but the kids that really want to get better, they will. And that is, to me, is made it a little bit more. I keep going throwback. It's the real kids they have real conversations, and they're throwback kids, and other kids that live in that fantasy world of what their Instagram and their Twitter handle looks like. It's no different than they're self-absorbed, and those are the kind of kids that they existed back in 1987, 1988, 1995, and 2003. Now they just have more ways to show that, being how self-absorbed they are. Before it was there was a kid that was really cocky, and now you can see their cockiness and based on how they're living their life. So I don't think things have changed when you really dig down deep. I just think things are different, but it's many different things.
Yeah. And Coach Barry, how about you, just in getting to know your players more and the conversations that you're having? If you had advice for maybe some kids that will be listening to this that want to go to a Cornell or a North Dakota or play Division I college hockey, what are some things that you think hold them back that they can work on as they're going through their process of getting better?
Yeah, I think one of the things when you talk about, the two programs we're talking about today, Cornell and North Dakota, those are long story tradition programs that had a lot of success. And I think, when you get recruited to those programs, first thing that goes into a lot of people or a lot of players' minds, not all of them, but some of them go, well, am I good enough to play there? Some players have a swagger or a confidence that, yeah, you know what, I got this, I can do that, and my skill set shows that. But there are some players that go, man, oh man, you know what, I got to get to that bar, and I got to do it every single day, and And I think that holds, some players back a little bit. But again, I think those are open conversations that you have with players before they even get in here. I think as coaches, you got to say the reasons why they're coming to Cornell or North Dakota. That, first of all, we believe in you. This is the role that we believe that you can play and help us win, and we'll help you do that. So I think they got to have the belief that you're in it with them to get them to where they need to go. And I think that's the first thing. I think Schafer alluded to, there's a lot of different things as far as, what could hold players back. And he's right. You have to kind of dig into it and try to, peel the layers back to find out what that is, and then try to help them get, over that hump. And that's part of the challenge of coaching, which I think is exciting, because it's a psychological thing, not only physical as far as getting them better, but psychological as far as, getting to where they need to go. And, I firmly believe that the leadership group is a big part of that. When you identify your good leaders and name them captains, they're an extension of your coaching group. And I know, for us as coaches, we're only in that locker room a small percentage of the time compared to what the players are together. So, having a really good leadership group and help them being mentors to those guys is a big, big deal. And again, we work on that a lot. I know it. I don't know what it's like in Ithaca. We're coming out there this fall, and we're excited to do that. But in Grand Forks, there's not a whole lot of things to do here other than go to school and play hockey. So what we really encourage our guys is to really be a tight team and do everything together. I know Fortnite and all this other video stuff is a big deal with kids, but we really try to say, hey, when we're doing this stuff, let's try to be tight as a team together and do it. And I think that's a big deal of helping kids get over what they need to do to get to where they need to go.
Yeah, and you mentioned the leadership groups, Coach. What are some things that you do with your leadership group to? Because I'm a huge believer in that. I think a coach is only as good as his leadership group. If they're not bought into what you're doing, I think it doesn't matter who you are, you're screwed. So what are some things that you maybe do with your leadership group to help them be a part of that team from that aspect and be an extension of you guys and get other guys to buy in and things like that?
Well, first of all, for us, it's having constant communication with them, not inundate them with meetings all the time, but whether it's if you have a captain and 3 or 4 assistants, it's either grabbing each of them individually and talking to them and asking their opinions, not taking everything to heart and using everything that what they have for their opinion on going forward, but when you ask a question and then you listen as a coach, that kind of perks up the ears of any player that, hey, you know what, the coach is listening to me. And you know what, I might have a little bit of an impact going forward here. But I think it puts the player, on the spot or in the spotlight saying, hey, I better have a good answer. I better have a good reason for it, because they might take my opinion into consideration. So, having kind of frequent meetings individually or collectively as a group with our leadership group, just to kind of get a pulse of the team and get feedback from them, whether it's, hey, travel, having extensive travel and what the week of practice looks like the next week, or going on a road trip and leaving one day versus the next day. Just first of all, just getting their feedback, and that goes a long way. And I can't say enough about how much it's changed in the fact that I remember in the days when I played college and pro, players never got asked. It was always told. You're always told to do something. And I think like I said, that goes back into the trust and the care factor. When you have that going back and forth, that I think that builds into a successful group.
Yeah, for sure. Coach, how about you?
Well, I think that leadership groups have I think that when we sat down with Brad at the Buffalo, it was really funny, because I think 5 of us had 5 different ways of addressing our leadership group, and it was kind of intriguing, and I think that probably I'll go right back to it, is that it really doesn't make a difference how you structure your leadership group, but I really think it comes back to the kids and what you have in that room, because they're going to take that message back to a group of guys. And Brad says they're definitely an extension of you as a coach. I think our leadership group, to me, starts with our assistant coaches. And, I go back to about who they're bringing to campus, and having kids that are like-minded in the locker room, because you could have a group of captains that are usually captains. They're guys that are really driven. And so when they ask, well, what do you want to do? Well, we want to skate in the morning, well, okay, let's go. But if you don't have like-minded guys in that locker room that also want to skate in the morning or trust those group of guys, It doesn't really matter what we do or the coaches do. I go back to the culture is what's a guy that's not playing want to do? What's, and I think that, so I think our assistant coach has done a tremendous job of bringing guys in that are like-minded. The leadership group for me is just what Brad said. It's just about communication, is that when you have a conversation with those guys, that they're getting back to every guy in the team. Like they're explaining why and how come to every guy, the guy that doesn't play to the guy that does play, the guy is tired, and why we're doing it and how come we're doing it. And I think go back to the communication is so important in the leadership group. But I think that doesn't matter how you do it. I think it's still what Brad said. It comes back to communicating, and then the leadership group going back and communicating and just making a trustworthy decision between the two, and that it's conveyed to, I like what Brad said. We, what do you say? We, us, and our. I mean, if that's not reflective in a leadership group, right? Every decision that you make is for everybody. And there's an old saying is that when you make a decision, you always keep the good of everybody in mind of that decision, whether it's personally or for the group. So I totally agree with them. I don't think it matters what you're doing and what type of leadership group it is, but I just think that communication is so critical in whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I love that. Well, you both mentioned recruiting as a huge piece to that in building your culture, building your leadership groups, and building your teams. When I was coaching at the level, and even now outside of it, and what I've been able to do, I think the biggest question that I get asked is, what are you guys looking for? As coaches are sitting in the stands and they're evaluating or they're doing their background work on players, from a hockey standpoint and a character standpoint. I get that question asked all the time still. So here we have the two guys that have won the top college hockey coach award this year. Coach Schafer, we'll start with you. When you're thinking about evaluating players and the players that you're looking to bring into your program, what are a couple different things that are non-negotiables for you that kids have to be able to succeed within your program?
Well, flat out, they got to be able to play for our staff. I mean, it doesn't matter what their talent level is. I mean, they got to have the ability to walk in and play for our staff. And I guess what that means is that, it's just a relentless pursuit of wanting to get better. You ask what if you give advice to kids when they want to get to college, I think two things would be, always stay in the present. Young kids always want to look to the future, and never live in fear. And so in the recruiting process, I think that looking at kids that have that mentality, I've always said some kids love to work, or like to work, and I think that working hard is going to be. I never asked a kid, "Hey, do you like to work hard?" Because we work hard. I've never said, "Kid, shake his head, saying no, I don't like to work hard." But there's a difference. Do you love to work hard? And I think that when I don't think a lot of those attributes are really developed in kids until they're 17 or 18 years old. And that's why I go back to recruiting, is to go out and see it actually happen. See them walk into a junior team, and can they adjust? Can they, continue to get better? Do they have the it factor? Yeah, I've been really happy. Like a few of our recruits that we have come in a couple of years have just been named captains on their junior team. And I think that's the kids we've chosen are the right kids, and so they got to have the basics. I mean, you're not taking a kid that can't skate, doesn't have skill, doesn't, for us, size, doesn't really matter. It's the size of how are they going to play big? Are they going to be able to, as I said, have the spirit in the hockey sense? And the hockey sense thing is the most difficult, to really judge. And I think, again, I go back to the young recruiting. That's where you make your biggest mistakes, is because, some kids are just so much more skilled and faster and are bigger than when they're 15 and 16 years old. But when everybody catches up, and everybody's the same at 18, 19, it's the hockey sense that kind of separates. So we're looking for those 5 things, skill, spirit, size, speed, and hockey sense. So those kind of the non-negotiables that we're looking for. And if we're going to sacrifice on one, the person better really have a special talent in those other 4. But character and culture-wise, we're just not looking for players. We're looking for people. And I think that that takes a lot longer to decide. And but that is the non-negotiables. is great people. I mean, and it's evident on recruiting trips. It's evident when you do home visits, how the kids and their parents relate to each other. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. You know, you've been there. You've been in my office when I've had kid in there and I've walked in, I've seen the parent, the way they've talked. you firsthand experienced me saying, this is your recruit, and walk out of the room.
See you later.
And how fast I've departed out of that office because I know that they're not coming to Cornell, and but not ignoring those red flags in recruiting. And those red flags are how the kid talks, how the kid handles himself. I'll tell you a story of a kid I was sold on the other day as I talked to him and reaching out to a lot of recruits because you're at home. And every kid, you know, on the other end of the line was, you know, had certain things. And this kid stopped me, and he was a 16-year-old kid. He goes, "Hey, coach, before we get going, I just really want to tell you how I'm happy for you that you're seasoned, but really happy for you as a coach that you know you were able to win a National Coach of the Year award and share it with Coach Barry from North Dakota." And I'm like, what? You know, like it was the first time, you know, and after about 10 calls that the kid actually said he was thinking about somebody besides himself. And I was like, sign me up on this kid, you know, the most mature 16-year-old that I've talked to on the line. And that's not ignoring that's seeing what's there in the conversation. And I think that I'm fortunate with Ben Sire and Sean and yourself and just guys that have worked for me is to not ignore those red flags and not get caught up with the ego of what other schools are looking at, and just sticking with what works well for us.
Yeah. And Coach Barry, how about you in your guys' recruiting process? What are some things that are important to you?
Well, very similar. A lot of those characteristics that Schafer said, but you know, I think the body of work is the biggest thing. And I think you mentioned it is, you know, every time that you go out and watch a player, I think everybody gets enamored with kind of the bright, shiny things, how fast the kid skates and, you know, how skilled he is. But I think when you really pull it back, I think there's a lot of other boxes that have to be checked. And part of that is, you know, trying to see this person or player on a regular basis of not just a one-time opportunity to see him on a good night. Like, you know, maybe watch him against a better team that's, you know, a little bit of adversity. How are you going to handle adversity? And that really shows a character of players. And for us, our culture, and I know Cornell's the same way, very strong culture, past history and tradition. It's the same with us. And when we walk into a building, you know, I think junior coaches or high school coaches know that, hey, you know, do we have a Cornell player or a North Dakota player for you? You know, there's a general identity of what, when we walk in a building of what kind of players we look for. And you know, first of all is obviously you have to be a very good hockey player in all those different individual areas, but you know, you have to have huge compete. You have to have a team first mentality. And I think body language is a big thing. You know, when we look at skill sets, the other thing we look at is body language. What's your body language look like in a game when you're winning and when you're losing? And you know, we always love those players when they score a highlight reel goal. The first thing they do is they point to the guy that gave them the puck instead of, you know, ripping their chest or putting their arms in the air, skating away from the pile that's congratulating you. You look at that guy that, you know, looks like they did it over and over again, but they point to the guy that passed the puck. Then the other thing is adversity. Like when things are going bad, you know, what do? Like, do you try to pick a teammate up on the bench or the goaltender that let in a bad goal or whatever? Those are the little things that we say, you know what, this guy can fit in here. And again, we all want to have leaders on our team, guys that are captains of their junior teams. And you know, that's a big thing that Schafer talks about. But we also want to have guys that are, you know, that'll accept the role. Like I firmly believe that, you know, you don't construct a successful team taking 20 of the best players that have the best skill set. You have to construct I believe a team that, you know, half your team is probably high end skill. The other half, you know, is it going to accept a bottom 6 forward role or a bottom 4 D role or a backup goaltender role? You have to build your team with a little bit of everything. And you have to have guys that accept that, in knowing that they're coming into the program and that's going to be their role.
Yeah, I love that. Well, moving on, it's kind of similar to these questions. Yeah, you guys both mentioned the recruiting aspects and wanting to get high skill level players as well. And both of you had players within this year's roster that made the Hobey Baker top 10. So Cornell, Morgan Barron, and Jordan Kawaguchi at North Dakota. So Schafer, I'll start with you on this one. What's it like coaching a kid like Morgan of his caliber, somebody that, you know, I think will have quite a bit of a long NHL career, having known him and having watched him play. What's it like to coach a kid like Morgan?
Well, with Morgan, I go back to it. He is an absolute throwback. And I go back to as a player, like he is everything that Brad and I have talked about today, like to the T. I mean, and everything. I mean, as a, you get back to when your best player on your roster, or one of your best players on your roster, has the mentality and lives and breathes it on and off the ice, of everything that Brad and I have talked about today. You got a a special player and a special team. And I guess what I mean by that is you talk about, I remember our first practice this year, Morgan went down ate a one-timer in practice. I'm like, and the guys are looking around, and the young guys are looking around going, wow, and how he handles the media. As I said, it's just a throwback. He loves to play hockey, and he loves to be with his teammates, and he doesn't get distracted by anything else than his friends on the team and playing hockey. And would he surprise me that he came back to Cornell? It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, do I know that the Rangers want him? There's no question the Rangers want him. They probably think he can play there next year. Would it surprise me to come back that he comes back? Not. It wouldn't surprise me at all, because he's a finisher. I mean, he's a guy that wants to get his degree. He wants to be with his teammates. He started something, and he's going to finish it. And that's what I mean. I've never had a player, I've had some really good players, but Brad's probably had some better players than we've had as far as, but I haven't had a team who stepped out and shadowed on the power play before. Like stepped out and stood beside on a power play. I'm like, I had Matty Molson, who's like one of the most dynamic power play guys I've ever coached. No one ever did that to him.
Well, that's because I was out on the ice.
Well, they were afraid. They were afraid of
my muffin of a shot.
No, they were afraid of your one-timer. So they knew they couldn't sag on him. But no, I mean, and just I've never that kind of kid that it didn't matter if you shouted him or not, because he could bully his way to his net. He didn't care if he was being covered. He just didn't care. He just showed up and played. And I tell you what, that's the culture thing. I go back to its players, and we can talk as much as we want, but when you get a guy like that who just shows up and plays and competes and practices and loves his teammates, it's pretty easy as a coach.
And Coach Barry, how about you? What was it like coaching a kid like Jordan Kawaguchi this year?
Yeah, I feel very grateful to be honest with you. Like, when we went through the recruiting process with him, and, it was one of those things too, Schafer talks about, trying to get leaders on teams every year, captains. Well, he played in Chilliwack and he was captain of his team. And, he was, Schafer talked about the late bloomers. He was kind of one of those guys. Like a lot of guys play 1 or 2 years of junior and then get to college and try to get to where they want to go. He had to play 4 years. He played 4 years in Chilliwack and came as a 20-year-old, as a young man coming into our group here. And I think one of the things that, he had a motivational side of that, he wasn't the bright, shiny toy. He was the guy that had to work hard every single day. And he had to prove himself every single day. And what I liked about him too is he knows that going forward here. He came in here, had pretty good 2 years, had a really good year this year. And, he made the commitment to come back next year, with some unfinished business that we have to do here. And when he said that, then the rest of the group said, yep, I'm coming back too. So that's kind of a big, big deal what a leader does and how other people react off of that. And, I think it's one of those things that he's such a humble and hardworking kid. And it sounds like Morgan Barron's the same way, that he'll do whatever the team he's asked from the team as far as doing, and he won't have any questions about it. And, when you have a Morgan Barron or Jordan Kawaguchi as a coach, he absolutely love that because they push the group. They absolutely raise the level of what everybody else is going to bring to the table because it's for the good of the team. And I think if we can keep those guys around college as long as we can, that's a good thing.
Yeah. Hopefully as long as you can, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's good. Well, I got one more question for you guys. I so much appreciate your time here today in speaking with me. And it goes kind of back to your guys' programs and who you are. And both programs have a very, very, very strong sense of tradition. dating back years and years and years. So Coach Barry, I'll start with you. You talk about team success. You talk about individual success. So many players that have come through the program like TJ Oshie, Jonathan Taves, Zach Parise. I mean, you just go down the line. How do you guys use that sense of tradition in building your guys' culture? How much do you talk about tradition? How important is it to you? And how do you implement that within what you're doing with your team?
Well, first of all, I think tradition has to have a sustainability. When those players come through your program, we call it adding to the tradition. We have a big wall that says add to the tradition, and those guys have. But it's not just about being here those 2 or 3 or 4 years. It's what do you do after? And what I feel really special about is all those guys that you just named. They communicate back, whether it's with us as coaches or our players here. When they're playing in NHL venues, the first thing they do after a game is they say, "How did North Dakota do?" And they have a strong connection to our group, and that tells you how tight our our culture is. And I know it's the same way in Cornell. So again, having those guys come through our program is a big deal. But going to the other side of it here, like I think everybody looks at those guys' names. What's gratifying for me as a coach is when you have a guy like Cole Smith in our group here. I don't know if a lot of people know about him, but he played 4 years for us. He's a big kid out of Brainerd, Minnesota. He's 6'4". He was the guy that he had to play all until exhaust his eligibility in junior. And he came to our program as a low money guy, as a role player. Ended up this year he played all situations, 5-on-5 power play, penalty kill. You know what? This guy is the outlier. He is the guy that you love to cheer for. He ended up signing a contract with the Nashville Predators, and that's what you love about college hockey is you have all those well-known names, but now the obscure guys coming through your program, and I know Cornell's the same way, that you get to help these guys on a daily basis of trying to get their goals and aspirations completed. And again, that's a big deal. So again, like I said, I just feel grateful that you get to touch a lot of players on all different levels.
For sure. And Coach Schafer, how about you?
Well, much like Brad, I mean, living up to the tradition, I think that not fearing the tradition. I think that's that we talk about that a lot. Is that not to worry about what people have done before you, but to blaze their own trail. And Topher, that we have our guys research their numbers at different times to find out who's the best player to ever wear the number, and try to live up to that when fans look out and they see a guy that played maybe before him, that they want to live up to that excellence, but also at the same time, they also want to try to unseat that guy, and can they be the guy that, someday in 10 years, someone else is voting for him, and to put his name on the back of that jersey as the best player. And we've had a lot of success with that, but we keep the trophies in our room, just above that stalls. And, it's tough because I think the whole motto of our program is to live in the present and worry about it in the process. And that is to focus on it on a day-to-day to get better. But I think when we bring the tradition back, guys come back, what Brad says, and they talk about it. I think if you have a culture that where you're playing for each other, just what Brad said, that lives with you forever, and it's always about the journey. It's never about the result. And when guys have that kind of experience where they've met their best friends for the rest of their life, no matter where they go from there on out, I think that you've done your job as a coach. And that is the tradition that we definitely want to uphold. If we're pursuing excellence, and we better be doing it the right way, so that they always be the best friends, and always think of Cornell as a place where it changed their life. And so I mean, it is about winning, but it's also about that experience. And I think it's going to be even more about the experience with all these transfers and the portal and guys being able to go wherever they want. Everybody keeps asking, what about, how's that going to affect? I think it's going to put programs like ourselves in North Dakota in a better light, because if you have that kind of tradition where you're playing for each other, guys don't want to leave. And if they do, they might be the guy that you don't want in the first place, and just couldn't fit in. But I think it's going to put even more of an emphasis on the things that we talked about: winning tradition, winning culture, and that culture is all about relationships, how guys got along.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I've got a couple different text chains of guys I played with at Cornell, and it's always the same stuff. Now we're, instead of doing stupid pictures to each other, we're sending pictures of our kids and things like that. And it's a huge part of it. And I know obviously being a part of it at Cornell and knowing guys that went to North Dakota and how special it is there. I mean, very, very cool and incredible that I think it's just really cool you guys talk about blazing the path. I mean, blazing the path, there is that huge, strong tradition, and you have to be strong enough as a person and as a player to, want to fit into that and want to add to that. But then also leaving your mark, I think is such a cool thing. Do you guys talk about that a lot? Obviously in your guys' answers you did, but how important is it to, have kids there that really want to leave their mark, not for their own careers, but leave the mark there for North Dakota and leave the place better than you found it? How, Coach Barry, how about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that last statement that you said, leave the place better than you found it. That has to be a concept that you love is when players come through here. And that's a big deal. Our players talk about that all the time. And, when you win, I think that's the culmination of everything. But I think having that lifelong experience of building those relationships and of, whether you go to the highest level in hockey or whether you leave with a great 4-year degree to get you off and a great start in life, that's a big, big deal. And again, like I said, it's one of those things that you got to make sure you have the right people sitting on the right seats on the bus. But at the end of the day, it's a great ride. And again, looking forward to this upcoming year on that too.
Yeah, for sure. Coach Schafer, how about you? We'll end it with you.
Brad's got the same line, man. Boy Scout, leave the place better than you found it. It's just about as simple as that. But I think that I go back to it. Like it was fun talking to Brad at Buffalo because you hear a lot about these sayings. Like you've heard a lot about the culture and talk about it. It's another to everything that we do is about that, right? You can sit at the coaches convention, listen to a guy talk about it, and that's easy. It's not easy to drive the culture that we have, and it's not easy for the players to buy into that culture. You sit in here, we've talked for about an hour, and we've talked about all the things. You're like, if I'm sitting there and going, why can't other programs do this? Like, why aren't other people doing this? And it isn't easy. It's not for the faint of heart, especially for the kids. And I think that's why I respect about Brad. And just said, to see him and share a coach of a year award with him, it's special. I know how he runs his program. I know how he treats his assistant coaches. I know how he handles himself at the convention and seeing him on the road in the rink. And so it's an honor, but it's no mistake that they got great culture, and it's not an easy thing to do. You got to live it. And we have our challenges, and those challenges are year by year. But yeah, it's leave the place better than you found it. But man, to get the kid to think that way and do those things, it's never assumed that it's just going to happen again next year. I'm sure Brad's sitting there, and I'm sitting here, over the last few weeks thinking about, we're going to have brand new kids, and how are we going to get back to that special sweet spot that we were probably both at right at the end of the year, where all cylinders were clicking. To get there is man, I'm not, it starts day one, not assuming that our freshmen or any of our returning players, they know anything about Cornell hockey, and start all over. And that's the special part.
Absolutely. And Coach Barry, any final words before we let you guys go here?
Couple things. That last comment really resonated with me with Coach Schafer there. Accountability. That word really hasn't come up, but I think that's a big deal within both cultures here. And I go back to, I know how he runs his group and how direct and caring that he is with his guys. But going down to Florida in those meetings, and when Coach Schafer stands up in those meetings and says comments, it resonates, and it's because it's direct. And it's making everybody else accountable. And that's a big, big deal. When you have to have tough conversations, or when you have to, pull everything into line, whether it's your group or whether it's a body of coaches, it resonates. And that's how you drive culture, is the accountability factor. So that's what I leave it with. And again, I feel grateful and honored to be in the same sentence with Coach Schafer on this national award. And, we always say that any individual awards is because of your team. And he mentioned his assistants, and it's the same with ours, our staff and assistants, and the players that drove it. So that's kind of the driver of that. And the very last thing is, hey, Topher, you do an unbelievable job. Watch you on Twitter and the things that you do on that hockey think tank. I think that's outstanding. I learn from it every single day. I look at that. So keep doing that. You do a great job. And Schafe, thanks again. We're looking forward to coming out to Cornell to revive our tradition and history of getting both programs together. just promise me one thing. Can you leave a few tickets for our fans at your rink? 'Cause they'd love to get into your rink. We haven't been there in a long time.
Not a chance. Especially if they're from Long Island, there's going to be no extra tickets going out to Long Island.
Awesome. Well, thank you two so much. Incredible seasons, incredible people. I've had a blast over this hour, but obviously been in rinks with both of you down in Florida and getting to know you and stuff like that. So keep up the great work, and can't wait to see what you guys have in store for everybody next year, and hopefully able to finish the job. It's been a tough last couple of months, I'm sure, for you guys and your players not being able to finish it, but fantastic seasons. And thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thanks, Schafer. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Take care.